All right. Welcome, everybody, to Season Planning with Sean Turriff. Sean is a friend and a co-worker of mine. We both work for the Ontario Curling Council. Sean is also he's the manager of high performance with the Ontario Curling Council. So he looks after or oversees our high performance teams. He's a chartered professional coach and NCCP Comp Dev certified. He's also the head of curling. He's the head curling coach at Humber College and has won medals with Humber College. So that's awesome. And amongst many other things, Sean has also authored a book, Curling Steps to Success. So if you're ever looking for some PD points, there's something for you to read that is even sports specific. So I'm just going to turn it over to Sean and take it away, please.
Thanks, Andrea. Do I have the ability to share?
I made you co-host.
Okay, then I must have the ability to share. It looks like I do. Awesome. Okay, you don't want to see my email. Oh my gosh. Get this out of the way. Sorry, technical difficulties. There we go. Pardon me. And I got to find the mute button because I have a cough that I want to mute for you all every time I do it. Whoa! Okay, there we go. Pardon me. Okay, and sorry for that delayed response. Thank you, everybody. First of all, thanks for attending. Andrea introduced me, so I don't have to introduce myself any further. A lot of you on the call know me already, and if you don't, that's okay too. The idea for doing this came a couple of years ago, actually. We get every year when we do our next gen intake, we get numerous questions on the planning side of it. And there's always questions before, there's always questions after. And some of them are, some of them have to do with the process that we put in place, and some of them have to do with the overall season planning process. And it came to a point this year where I was getting enough questions that it was like, okay, I think maybe it's time we put it all out there for those of you who haven't or may just want to know more about planning in general. Because what we do with the next gen intake applications, we expect relatively specific things. And as I sit down and look at the intake, I think to myself, this is a good system. It's not something I've come up with, but it's a good system. And it's relatively straightforward. It's a lot of work, and you'll see what I mean when we get into this, but it should make sense. And then sometimes what we get are submissions that just don't make sense. And so it's clear that I think there's a misunderstanding around what the different tools are and such. So that's where the idea of doing this presentation came from in the first place. So like I say, it's built on that framework of the next gen application. I'm aiming for an hour long, so bear with me. I don't want to shortchange anybody. There's a lot here, but at the same time, it's like I said, it's a process that I'm personally really familiar with, and so if I go too fast or too slow or anything, I want folks to slow me down. All right. Introduction to season planning. Okay, so let's just get this. And every once in a while, I am going to mute myself because I have a tickle on my throat, and it's a bug that I've got, and I don't want you listening to me cough. So, like that. There we go. So first of all, season planning. This is for all competitive teams. Now, our next gen is typically U18, U21. There's some U25 and adult teams, and this really does apply to any competitive team that wants to have a competitive season. As I mentioned like 15 times now already, we do use it in our next gen application process. It takes one of the comments, I'll put it that way, that we get is that it's an awful lot of work. And yes, it is an awful lot of work because planning an entire season is a lot of work. And there's a lot of detail that has to go into this. It should probably take a lot of work. There's a lot of information here. The level of detail, though, that you put into it is really going to depend on the team and the level of the team that you're coaching. The season plan for a Brad Gushu is going to look a lot different than the season plan for a U18 team that may just be entering their competitive side of things. So, I'm going to give you the everything version here. And keep in mind as we go through it that depending on the team, you may do less than every little bitty detail that's on here. Sorry, that was one of those pauses for the cough. The other thing that I want to highlight before we get going is that this is you hear it often when you talk about planning, but these are living documents. These are things that are continually updated, should be continually reviewed. They're supposed to be tools. This isn't something that you should just do, throw in a drawer. You've heard that phrase before, but it's very true. This is useless if you sit down and do the whole thing and then say, great, I'm done, walk away from it, and then get on with your season. That's not the intent. Okay. It's coach managed, athlete buy-in, because it's the athlete that you're actually developing, right? But you're the quote unquote expert in the room. So you're the one who's guiding them. So you're going to manage you're going to manage the tools as a coach. But the athletes need to know this inside out as well, because they're the ones who are executing the plans that are going in it. What I've learned relatively recently, and I mean within the last couple of years, is that this is a framework that's pretty common in a lot of other sports. We've been working a lot with CSIO, and I'll refer to them as we go through, but CSIO is the Canadian Sport Institute in Ontario. There's one out west and there's one in Atlantic, and they're a multi-sport organization that helps individual sports push their performance higher. And so I've been to a number in the last couple of years of events and learning opportunities with the CSIO. And in those sessions, I've learned that this is pretty common across sport out there. We're maybe not as good at it in curling. I don't want to throw shade on us at all, but I do think that this is something that maybe we could shore up a little bit. It's in line with what other sports are doing on a competitive level. And it's also in line, believe it or not, with what a lot of other countries are doing. I've recently been enlightened by at least one portion of it, and I'll talk about it when we get there, at the national level, a little story there when we get to it. So we're kind of catching up a little bit, but we're getting there. We're on the right path. Yeah. Season planning steps. So I'm gonna go through a lot of stuff. But these are the big steps. These are the big chunks that I'm going to go through. A gap analysis, something called an IAPP, which a lot of you will not have heard of, an annual plan and goals. Now, some of that stuff is going to look relatively, like I would expect most of you to be relatively familiar with the gap analysis, the annual plan, and the goals. The IAPP part is the part that may be new to you, but I'll go through them all in detail. Just to get us kicked off, though, the gap analysis, for those of you who might not know what it is really an objective review of where teams and players currently perform on all areas. So I'll go into more detail when we get there. So it's an objective review. Think of it that way. The IAPP stands for Individual Athlete Performance Plan, and it's the plan to execute training to close the gaps. It's not just that. It also helps with the strengths that you've already got or that your athletes already have, but that's really kind of what it is. It's going to look more complicated than it really is. So, annual plan, of course, is a coordination of all these plans, and it coordinates your plans with your calendar, coordinates your plans with your competition. It's partly a schedule, but an effective annual plan is way more than just a schedule, and you'll see that when we get into it. And goals, of course, I think that's probably the part that most of us are most familiar with. That identifies what the desired accomplishments are for the team and for each individual. Now, there's different types of goals, and we're going to talk about that too. So I would say that each of these steps could be hours plus on their own, just on their own. I've personally sat through a lot of IAPP education because it was so new to me. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to go through each of these pieces, but it will be at the higher level. It won't be in a ton of detail because otherwise we'll be here all night. Also a snapshot of what my process looks like. Okay, so I'm going to start. It looks like a cycle, and that's the way I view it. a cycle starting with outcome goals. I'm going to refer to this graphic over and over and over again as we go through it. Starting with outcome goals, moving to a gap analysis, moving to performance goals, then to your IAPP, your process goals, and your annual plan. Okay, so our first step is, of course, the outcome goals. Now, outcome goals are the thing I think most teams and most players are most familiar with. These are the things like, I want to win the Brier, I want to win the Scotties. That's right. Those are those high level. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to accomplish. And I don't really like that phrasing. I like it to sound more like, what do you want to come out of your competitive experience, as opposed to thinking too much about winning, losing, this event, that event. Okay. In general, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on goals. Like I say, we could spend all hours on goals, but it's important that you understand what good goals are. And I'll refer to that as we go on. There's different models out there for good goals. And some of them are better than others, but I think that's something we're all relatively familiar with. So I won't spend a lot of time on that. So I'm going to suggest that we start on good, having good outcome goals. Pregnant pause while I cough, excuse me. All better. Starting with good outcome goals. Now, they're nothing set in stone here. So you and your athletes are going to decide, okay, what are our outcome goals? And from there, we can get the planning cycle kicked off. Most of the planning cycle is analysis and planning for that analysis and the results. So you have to have somewhere to start. There's no real template for this kind of thing. Goals are goals. So you're going to write it out. And I should have said maybe off the top, I have templates for the gap analysis, the IAPP, and pardon me, I have templates that that we can send out to you. These things have been sent out with the annual plan. These things have been sent out with the next gen application information, but the more it gets spread around, the better. So there's no real template, like I say, for the outcome goals, because really, what is it? It's a listing of what you want to accomplish in a proper format. So I won't give you that. Back to our process snapshot. Okay, so we've got our outcome goals, and we're going to slide on over here to our gap analysis. Now we're going to talk about a gap analysis in a little bit of more detail. There we go. Gap analysis. I want you to think of a gap analysis as where you need to be versus where you are. Okay, it's not any more complicated than that from a philosophical point of view. Okay, and I think a gap analysis, the more and more I work with teams, and this is essential. You have to know where you need to be in order to even start thinking about where to plan. Sorry, gap analysis. Gap analysis. Okay, so there's some keys with your gap analysis. There's a ton of different ways to document this, but the content is really critical. So what I mean by that is what areas you're going to examine and how you examine them. Okay, it has to be in depth. It is in depth, and what I'm going to show you is a lot of detail, like I said off the beginning. A couple of other keys here. It's measurable. So the whole point of the gap analysis is to identify where you are not performing. So you need to have benchmarks to know what performance level you want to attain, and then you have to go and be able to objectify the thing that you're actually trying to accomplish. Okay, gaps come in individual and team gaps. There's going to be both. We're going to talk a little bit about both. So when we talk about it being measurable and having benchmarks, it means you're going to have to do a little bit of homework before you do your gap analysis, because really, again, like I say, it's an analysis of where you need to be versus where you are. Knowing where you need to be is sometimes as difficult to figure out as where you are. So a U18 team, for instance, needs to know what the performance level is at the top end of the U18 crowd in order to be able to set that benchmark. Sometimes finding that out, figuring that out is difficult. That information isn't readily available. So this is something, like say it's in depth, but it's also can be kind of time consuming. And it's also something you want to maybe keep an eye on in terms of those measurable items. Measurable, I said, was really important, of course. one of the issues we have with some of the gaps that we measure is that it's not, when we talk about measurable, if it was in a perfect world, we'd be able to put something like a tape measure on it and be able to say it's X number of centimeters. A lot of the gaps when we talk about them are fuzzy, if you will. So we have to sometimes come up with a measuring system that's consistent. You'll understand what I mean when I show you the example here in a bit. Whatever measuring system you use really needs to be consistent, and it really needs to be repeatable so that the same result gets you the same measurement at the end. Okay, you always want to be comparing apples to apples, because really this is exactly what you're doing. And if you're not doing that when you're doing your gap analysis, then the information you're putting in there is relatively useless. Okay. Okay, gap analysis, team gaps. Now, this is where this comes out of the template, and this comes out of, against a lot of the multi-sport information that I've been exposed to recently. So team gaps, there are some important areas that need to be analyzed. So we've got style of play. So how well does your team adhere to your playbook? Conditions management. How well does the team adjust to conditions in competition? Now, that's not just ice. That's everything. That's environment. That may be sleeping in a hotel that doesn't work for you. It may be exposure to different food that if you've traveled somewhere exotic. Conditions management. Okay, it's a broad thing. Positional expertise. Now, what I see when I get the next gen applications, I see a focus on the positional expertise, because it's relatively, that's the sort of the low hanging fruit. That's the skills with shot making and communication and such across all positions. Excuse me for a second. Back. And that one's a relatively, I won't say it's easy, but it's the first thing I think a lot of coaches and players jump to. So I see a lot of good positional expertise gap analysis, but not so much on the other stuff necessarily. Cultural leadership, that's referring to the direction of excellence. So our values identified, and are they enacted? Are you living your team values? Are you doing the things that are important to you and your team? Team functioning, I might argue this is maybe one of the things that doesn't get enough attention until it's a problem. So in terms of a team gap, that's something maybe you want to look at early on. That's task and social cohesion. Does the group work well together? Not just do they get along together. It's very common to see a group that gets along well, but doesn't complete tasks well together. There's a big difference there. And let's be honest, if you're on a competitive team, you're on a competitive team to try and win. You may all be friends, but if you can't get it done together, then that's not why you're together as a team. Performance on demand, that's relatively straightforward. That's ability to maintain and surpass performance benchmarks in games. So within each aspect of this is kind of the big bucket stuff in the team gap analysis. And within each big bucket here, there's detailed elements, and it's the detailed elements that get measured. So we don't measure cultural leadership. I mean, my goodness, I was thinking about this as I was putting it down. I don't know how that would even work, right? You're not expected to measure cultural leadership. You're expected to measure elements within the cultural leadership. And as you can imagine, as I said before, that's where it gets difficult to put an objective measurement on it. But we still have to try. Individual gaps, just so like we had the big buckets for the team gaps, we've got big buckets for the individual gaps. And those are technical, tactical, physical, mental, social. So technical, that's, again, we're relatively familiar with that. That's the movement patterns and the actual physical things we do in curling, right? The delivery, brushing, that kind of thing. Tactical is the decisions we're making before and during a shot. Physical, these are things like our fitness levels and areas like that. Mental, psychological capabilities required for our peak performance. So that's things, our mental toughness, we tend to think of it that way. Social, and that's our interactive capabilities that are required for our team to function well, to get that task cohesion that we need so badly. And again, similar to what we just said about the team gaps, each of these is going to have elements that we will actually measure. So an example below in the technical, because that's the easy one, is the hip alignment, for instance, measuring the hip alignment, the shoulder alignment to the target, these kinds of things. These are the kinds of things that the elements under technical. So our next slide is going to be, an example. So this is a piece of a gap analysis that was developed at the OCC that aligns with the LTCD, long-term curling development model. I'm going to stop sharing this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the actual file if I can. I'm going to do this really quick. Oh, I didn't open it. Okay. Andrea. Andrea's not listening.
Yes, I am listening.
Okay. Can you tell me, can you see the spreadsheet that's got like a ton of words on it?
Yeah, technical, tactical, physical, mental, social. Yep, got it.
Wonderful. Thank you. So this is the gap analysis tool that was developed that I just showed you the snapshot of. And what's been done is each stage and stage kind of thing has been given its own tab down here below. So we'll click on the one that was on the slide, this is the U15 one, and you'll notice that that technical I'll just scroll down really quickly to show you the volume, okay, of things that are analyzed here. Okay, so I'm down to about 88 lines of stuff. Okay, now, again, it covers the technical, tactical, physical, social, mental buckets. It has elements within each of those big buckets. You'll notice that as much as possible, let's see. So something like we talked about the measurability of things. So approaching the hack from behind, ball of the foot on the back of the hack. So how do you measure that, right? How do you get a number, physical measurement of that? So what we tried to do when we built this is in the criteria here, make this something that you can actually observe consistently and repeatably, and therefore get at least a repeatable. It's not quite fair to call it a measurement, but to get a repeatable analysis of that kind of thing. Okay. So this file I'm happy to send out to everybody. I'll have to double check with Jen, but I think there's nothing wrong with it. It may change, and if you haven't signed up for the technical webinar that's coming up later this month, then you might want to, because it will change. Some elements in here will change slightly based on the updated technical information that Curling Canada is putting out. But for now, this is a good place to start. What changes between tabs is just the level of performance. So for instance, level performance for draws, for instance, here, hits and overall of U18 versus U21. That's an example of what changes. Okay. And just as, of course, as athletes get older, then that's going to increase or change. So that's a gap analysis tool that you can use. This is primarily an individual one. I have to dig a little bit for a gap analysis for a team, but I will do that when we send out our information. Okay, going to the next. We're going to keep moving on. So we've completed our gap analysis, and at this point in time, I'm going to say, look, you know what? We completed our gap analysis, and it's maybe time to look at our performance goals. And the reason this is next for me is that we've kind of just figured out, I think, what our performance goals should be through our gap analysis, because we've identified those things in our performance for our athletes. I keep talking about it as though we're doing it for ourselves, but we've identified those things for our athletes, that those performance elements that they have to work on. And so if they know the performance elements that they have to work on, then the performance goals are done. Really, there you go. The gap analysis has informed your performance goals. that's not coming from out of the blue. It's not coming from some random place that doesn't have anything backing it up. You did the gap analysis. You know that it's your setup in the hack that is failing you every time. Therefore, your performance goal should be around a better setup in the hack, as a for instance. In terms of, in case folks don't know what process goals are, performance goals. I kept talking about performance goals. I kept talking about process goals. I meant performance goals. The difference here is performance goals can sound a little bit like outcome goals. Sounds like performing, but outcome is very much win provincials versus performance curling at like 75% 9 times out of 10, or an average of the season, that kind of thing. Okay. Again, there's no real template for this because similar to the outcome goals, it's just a listing of the goals. But again, this gets informed by your gap analysis. Okay, that's enough of the performance goals. Now we're under our IAPP. So just to sit back and see what we've got in our pocket already, we know what we want to accomplish in the year. We know what we want to win. That's our outcome goals. We know our gap analysis because we've sat there and we know our gaps. We know for our athletes what areas they need to improve on technically, tactically, all this stuff, because we did this ton of work. So what we did was we said, okay, those are our goals. That's where we're going to improve. We've got that. And in fact, with the gap analysis, because we've measured it, we even know how much we want to improve it. That's the benefit, one of the benefits of having this stuff measurable. Because our performance goal isn't just, I want to get better at draws. Well, our gap analysis said that at the U18 level, skips have to be throwing at 75% in order to be national champs. Currently, we're throwing at 63%. Therefore, my performance goal is to improve my draw percentage by 12%. So that's where we are at this point. Okay. IAPP is the next stage. Okay. And this is it's going to be new to most of us. Up until about a year ago, it was new to me as well. My understanding, though, is that it's very common in other sports, and I know for a fact that it's now being finally embraced at our own national level. I really just want you to think about this as the plan to implement to address the things which you identified in the gap analysis. So I just went through a little example. Oh, we need to improve our draw weight by 12%. Okay, that's nice, but how do we do that? Okay, and that's what the IAPP is for. It's both as simple as that and as complicated as that. Make no mistake, the IAPP is a plan. Okay? It's completely informed by the gap analysis. Even the priorities upon which you work on things in your IAPP is determined by the analysis you made in the gap analysis. The biggest gaps probably get addressed first. Relatively simple, right? It's not limited to gaps only as well. The other thing you want to do with the IAPP is it doesn't say an individual gap analysis plan. It's a performance plan. So the other thing we want to do with the plan is identify the strengths that our players already have, and then make sure we're monitoring them so that they don't slip and become gaps. Okay. The contents, sorry, I already said there's a ton of ways to create this plan, but similar to the gap analysis, there's some critical elements. So I'm going to show you an example in a second in the same way I showed you the gap analysis example, but I'll just go through it really quickly before we get to that. First of all, going to identify the gap that requires our attention. It should be one of the priority gaps right from your gap analysis. We're going to identify the measured value of the gap as well as our target level. So where are we now? What do we want? We got that. It's all from our gap analysis. Then this is where the new part comes into this. So we want to identify how we're going to improve that gap. Okay, we need to improve our gap, or our draw percentage by 12%. So how are we going to do this specifically? What are you going to do to train that? What equipment, human resource, what other things do you need to execute that training? How often are you going to train that? Is it going to be weekly? Is it going to be every practice? Is it going to be, what is it? And then there's a time element to it as well. How long do you think it's going to take to bring that gap skill up to a level where it's no longer a gap? This also helps you track the progress of the training that you're doing to complete that gap. To close the gap, pardon me. So, like I said, it also monitors the strengths that you have identified for your athletes, and it keeps track to make sure nothing is slipping. And the process is exactly the same. You identify the strengths, you identify the measured value, the target level, and your accepted deviance. So I am already throwing 80% as a U18 curler. I only need to be at 75, so I'm great. But I'm going to keep an eye on that because that's a strength for my athlete. And so what's going to be okay as a slippage? Maybe none, maybe zero, maybe we just said 75 is top of the heap, and I'm making that number up just so you know. It's not, I don't have that in my back pocket, but maybe 75 is the top of the heap in the country. So maybe a deviance of 5% is okay before we have to start addressing it. This is the kind of thing that we're going to record and keep track of on our IAPP. And then we're going to, just exactly the same as you do with the gaps, we're going to keep track of how we're going to train it to maintain it, what support we're going to need, how often you're going to do it, that kind of thing. Another thing that the IAPP will contain are integrated services that you may need. So, for instance, what outside services, what that will benefit your athletes? Again, both the IAPP and the gap analysis will should inform you of what those outside services should be. So, for instance, has your performance on demand been identified as a gap? Have you decided it's because nerves are a great big issue and you need tools to be more mentally prepared for big games? Well, it sounds a little bit like you need a mental performance coach. And there you go. Now you've got a record of the outside services that's informed by the gap analysis and your IAPP. This is an example of the IAPP that we developed. I will show you this is just a screenshot of the dashboard tab, but I'll pull the entire document up in a second. So this we created in consultation with the CSIO, and we were I don't want to say we were made to do it, but again, it was brand new to us. And so we started from ground zero in terms of understanding how it would be used and where it would be used and what it even looked like. And after all the training was done, it looked relatively simple. And I think it is, but there's a little bit of a shock when you first see it. I don't really understand why and what it is and what's going on. All of the documents we talk about in this whole process is a living process. It's a living document. This might be the most living one of them all, because I would expect this to be the most active. You're going to have to be referring back to it over and over again, because it's going to be tracking the training time, the training efforts, the things you're putting into closing those gaps. And so this is something, as the season goes on, it's unlikely you'll change, for instance, your annual plan. It's unlikely you'll change that very much. It's you'll probably take a look at your gap analysis a few times, but this thing is going to continually be updated. The purpose really, again, is to identify when the gap is improved to a level where it's no longer a priority or a gap. When you determine that, then the gap analysis can be reviewed, and then the next highest priority gap should be added to this. So that's why I say it's always kind of in motion. If you've achieved a performance goal, you can also celebrate that. Individuals should always be working to improve the next highest priority gaps throughout their careers. And I think as coaches, we know that. But for those of you who are familiar with what's called a Pareto analysis is a ranking of any issues you've got. And then typically what you'll do is you'll take the top, however many you can handle. In this case, maybe 3, maybe 4. You work on them until they're no longer the top 3. And then you reevaluate, pick the next top 3. And that's it. And so there's always going to be a top 3. They may not be as huge as they were when you started, but the idea behind a Pareto analysis is that you continually update that top 3 so that you're always working on the highest priority issues. And the idea behind the IPP is that it organizes that effort and it tracks your progress. So I'm going to flip over now to the template. Here we go. Hopefully you can see that. So this is the dashboard we just looked at. And I'll go through it, not in a ton of detail, but it's relatively simple. So we started the date on the gaps here. This is, like I say, this is just the dashboard. So it's a snapshot of everything that's going on past it. There's your gap. I call it an asset, but that's that thing, like maybe it's your draw weight, for instance. The priority of that gap. How big of a deal is that gap? Again, none of this stuff is coming out of thin air. This is all identified in the gap analysis if you've done that thoroughly. Even the initial measured level. I put a little note in here. Measured levels are in your gap analysis. Enter the measurement from your gap analysis here. Don't guess. Your target level, that comes from, your it comes partially from your gap analysis, but also from your performance goal. And there's your target date when you want to complete it. Process, simply how are we going to do this? How are we going to accomplish this? What support do we need? And monitoring frequency. And you'll see that, so the bottom is just the strengths, and it looks almost exactly the same, except for the accepted deviance, because there's not a date by which we have anything to worry about with respect to the strength. Following tabs are tracking. So very similar to what you just saw, but it's really just a tracking page. And the next page is just why is that sticking up there? Okay. Is the process, tracking the process. So what did you do? So here's the gap. And then this is like a continual record. Think of it almost as a journal, right? Now, again, these tools are, how you use these tools will vary based on the level of your team, the engagement of your team, and what level you're working at, and all that. So don't get overwhelmed by all this. If you've got the dashboard filled out, you've started off in a pretty good place. At least you've got a plan, right? Especially for younger teams, at least you have a plan to address those gaps. And the other two tabs are just simply the same thing, but for the strengths. Here's the strengths. Here's where it is. We're just going to track those here, and then there's the process for maintaining the strengths. And so it's very much mirrored strengths and gaps. Like I say, when I first was introduced to this tool, I did not understand it. And now that I understand it, I feel silly that I did not understand it, because at its root, it is just an action plan for your gap analysis. That's really all it is. And if you don't like the spreadsheet, awesome, that's okay. But keep in mind, what you do need is some plan. You need a plan to address the gaps. You know what they are. How are you going to fix them? And that's all the spreadsheet is meant to do. I've seen these things from other sports, sailing I've seen, and some other sports, and some of them get a little extensive. This is as simple as I can make it to cover all the things that I had apparently been taught by the CSIO. So there we go. Okay, so we're back to, his hand up, and I will hush because Peter raised his hand.
And I just remembered to take my mic off of mute. Yeah, like having seen this for the first time, it does look confusing, and I obviously have to work with it. But having coached teams like U15 up to U21, I would find it hard. Earlier on, you said, how the athletes have to be part of this. This is something that I probably wouldn't, for a U15 team, wouldn't broach this with them. I would have a different format to identify the gaps, and then certainly have a plan for addressing the gaps. The last U18 team I coached, probably in the last year, they were at the point where they would have been able to deal with this. And then certainly the U21 team that I work with, they would have been all over this. So it's just like you said, depending on the team and the scale, like some of this stuff probably in this format wouldn't be appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too that, these are tools for us, right? Like you're not necessarily going to be, there's a couple of things you said that really resonated in a good way with me. So first of all, I'll get back to where I was. These are tools for us, so that the idea being it helps us organize our efforts towards their development. So that being said, like the thing that resonated with me with what you said was that I would have a plan to cover the gaps, even at the U15 level. And that's all this really is. This is just a really detailed version of that. And so I think you're right on the money there. I think it's, a U15 team to do all this for is I would not necessarily advocate for that. I would not. And I think you're starting to get the right idea. Now, I also know, however, though, that at our national level, teams have not been doing performance planning. They've been doing gap analysis, but then they've been doing no performance planning. And so it's a little baffling as to how they've been managing to cover their gaps or to close their gaps, right? It's once you ignore the fact that this is a spreadsheet with a bunch of cells in it. Once you kind of embrace the idea that you need a plan to close your gaps, where does that fall into your season plan? As soon as you embrace the fact that, well, I need a plan to close those gaps, then you've embraced the idea of an IAPP, because it doesn't matter whether it looks like this or not. You need that plan. And it doesn't really fall in, it doesn't really fall in explicitly in the annual plan. As we move forward, I'll show you that it's going to show up in the annual plan, but unless we have something explicit around the gap itself, it's almost like it's not there on purpose to some extent. So good comments.
Question, Sean.
Yeah.
These templates, coaches could take these and make them their own, right? Like they can take these and put in whatever is suitable for their team. This isn't a one size fits all document, correct?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I said early on is, like, for instance, with the gap analysis, there are elements that, for the example, the next gen application, I want to make sure you measure those elements. That we want to make sure, if I flip back a little bit as an example, here we go. With the team gap analysis that you submit for your next gen application, I want to make sure that you've addressed style of play, conditions management, positional expertise, cultural leadership, team functioning, performance on demand. But do you need my template? No. But make sure those are included. That's all. And absolutely, Andrea, you're 100% right. They don't have to use my spreadsheet here at all. But again, from a season planning point of view, I think it's important that you have that plan, right? Now, the other thing I'm going to say, I keep referring back to the next gen application, but it's only because that's the where this idea started to put on this presentation at all, right? I will always say that whatever tools you use, they need to be functional and useful for you. They need to be something you're going to use. If you're not going to use them, then don't try to use them. Don't go through the effort of putting this all together and then putting it in a drawer. So the next natural question might be, why are you making next gen teams do it if you just said that? Well, because what we found is that a lot of the next gen applications are like a lot of the next gen teams they're applying, they don't do good season planning. So you know what? Darn it all, I'm going to give you a template. I'm going to give you a process, and you do it. You fill it out, and let's see how well you do at it. And so that's where all of this kind of comes together. Now I'm kind of off on the rails, so I apologize. But good comment, good question. So thank you, Peter, and thank you, Andrea. Okay, back to no more questions. I don't see any more hands, so that's cool. Next, process snapshot. Back to a process snapshot. Hey, we skipped. No, we didn't. Next thing is our process goals. So again, if I run through it all, at this point, we know what we want to. We know what we want to win. We know our gaps and what we have to work on to get there. We have goals around that. That's performance goals. We have a plan to address that gap. Now, we have a plan, but maybe next thing we should do is set some process goals. And process goals, think of these as it's goals around how you work to make that process, or how to make that training work. How well are you going to work on this? And again, this is something that'll come a little bit out of the IAPP, because one of the things you identified in your IAPP was how often you're working on things. So that's at least a start. right? How often are you going to practice? When are you going to practice? Training reps, practices, that kind of thing. Oop, went the wrong way. Did I go wrong? No, I didn't. Okay, so that's, again, no template for that because it's just a list of goals. And we're not going to go through goals. Said that already, but make them good goals. Time you're setting goals. Now back to our process. The next step is the annual plan. And like I said, at this point, hopefully you see why I said off the top that the annual plan now is not just a competition schedule, because the annual plan is now pulling all this stuff into a schedule together with the competition schedule. And it's really important to do this so that your training schedule fits in with your competition schedule. So you're training the right things at the right time. So you're peaking. This too is a very large topic. I will not do it justice. I will give you the bare minimum because these are day long. This is a day long conversation. More than that even, I think. So I'm really just going to talk about what we've done so far comes into this. And you're going to be overwhelmed by the giant spreadsheet I show you as well. But going back to what Peter said, that's sort of the full blown out version. When you see it, you'll see what I mean. Okay, so the annual plan, it is going to be, even the simple ones are going to be pretty extensive. They should be extensive and they should be detailed because the idea is you're incorporating all the work you've already completed into it. It's, like I said, more than a competition schedule. That is definitely one element, and it's an important one. But it's a schedule of work and competition that fits in together. Think of this as how we put the training and competition in conjunction with each other. Because remember that the point of training is to improve your performance, right? I mean, we're not doing this. It's not an exercise in making paper. Like, we're only ever doing this so that we can help our athletes get better. So what should our annual plan contain? Definitely should contain the competition schedule. Should contain the team training schedules and individual training schedules. And it should, of course, those are the technical, tactical, physical, mental schedules in detail. The more detail you have, the easier it is to keep track of it. You should be testing. So this is something that I don't think we're real good at in curling, and that's testing. And really, we talked right at the top about benchmarks in your gap analysis and measuring your performance, and that's all we're really talking about. Yeah. There's a couple of, if you're not aware of it, Curling Canada has a singles app out now that you can use for testing. Essentially, it's really focused on shots, so you can use it to set up shots, a variety of shots, and it's age and stage based. So it'll set up shots for your athletes at whatever stage they're at, and then you can measure them every once in a while. You can measure them. What does once in a while mean? Well, it depends what your annual plan says, right? That's for instance, fitness testing is fitness. The fitness industry is much more so much more used to this kind of thing, and because fitness, the term, for instance, personal best gets thrown around a lot in physical fitness testing, right? And the personal bests come from not in the middle of a training session, but from a testing session. So the other thing that your annual plan is going to outline is the emphasis and intensity of your training elements. So are you really going hard on the physical fitness stuff, or are you backing off? And how often are you doing that? So the annual plan looks like a roadmap for development throughout the season. Now, brace yourself. And I'm going to say again, just addressing Peter's point about the IAPP, this is the full-blown, everything, all bells and whistles kind of annual plan. Okay. So yes, I know everybody's like, what am I looking at? Okay. And so what I'll do is I'll flip over to the actual file. There we go. Then I can talk about it a little bit. So it's a little scary, but the first 5 columns here are just basically breaking up the year into dates. Do you need, to your example earlier, do you need monocycles and microcycles for U15s? Nah, probably not, right? Maybe you can just hide those for the U15s. right? The rest of this is just weeks and days of the year. The competition's all in here. That's pretty simple. Like we know when our competitions are, and we've set some goals around outcomes, so we know when the important ones are. So we'll plop them in there. Maybe we're running some camps. Now we get into practices. And this is where we're going to outline when we're practicing. Testing, physical testing, performance analysis. As we scroll down a little bit, this is how much we're spending, how much emphasis we're putting on the various pieces. Okay. And again, maybe you don't need it broken down this much. Maybe you just say in the first third of the year for our U15s, we're working on this. Maybe it's less. Maybe you're not concerned about aerobic, anaerobic systems for your U18 team. So you just get rid of that kind of thing. Right? The physical, this is going to depend on what you're physically working on with your fitness stuff. But remember, we talked about physical, technical, tactical, mental, and social. And that stuff is all encompassed in here somewhere. Okay? Now, you're going to look down this, and this stuff isn't made up just for the annual plan. The stuff on the left here and the ABC columns, that's all the stuff. All the stuff's coming out of your stuff you've already done. So for instance, the competition stuff that comes from your outcome goals, right? The priority of what you're working on down in here, however you want to necessarily record it, that comes from your gap analysis and your IAPP. Maybe you don't need this level of detail. Maybe you don't. Like I said, this is everything and everything all together all at once. Okay. So you just take out what you don't need depending on the level you're at. It can be a lot simpler than this and still be effective. I think the overarching point, though, is that this is informed by everything you've done so far. And the dates and times you select work in conjunction with the competitions that you're playing in. That's really, from the 10,000 foot view, what your annual plan really needs to be.
Peter has his hand up.
Oh, hang on, Peter. Yep. Okay, fire away.
Sorry, problem child. So years ago, there was periodicity training. I think I said it right. Is this just sort of the next stage of that?
Yeah, I mean, we still think about periodization. Like we think about when to peak and when we need to rest and all that kind of thing. And if you look in here, there's phases right at the top here. That's the idea behind the different periodization. And again, I don't think that periodization concept is gone anywhere. It's just that's kind of discussion that would really extend this if we're going to get really into annual planning. It hasn't gone away. It's just how much do you worry about that necessarily? For a U15 team, even, you might not even have a full year annual plan, right? And so the periodization might just come down to, well, we're not going to do 7 practices in a row the week before our first spiel kind of thing.
Yeah.
That might be all it is, right? So, oops.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. And I think last but not least, on this at least, if you're not using the tools, don't forget the tools are meant to organize and focus your training efforts. It's not meant to be a make work project. It's not meant to be how many boxes can we check and what it isn't. It's supposed to provide tools that really, really, really help you organize your training with the team. Like I said, I'm giving you the full bore here with this annual plan. This is as much detail as anybody anywhere will ever probably need. Okay. If this isn't useful to you, then don't use this. Use what's useful to you. I think any planning is better than no planning. And if it looks like this and this is overwhelming, don't use this. I fully support that. Goals. Okay, we're going to talk about goals a little bit because that's the next thing in our cycle. It's time to review our outcome goals. We've got everything now in place. Now, I think what we can do, I think it's important, is to look at our annual plan, look at our training plans, look at everything we put together, and then decide, are our outcome goals realistic? Can we really win X? Or are those events really something that, and are they important to us anymore? And I think that review is important. I really do think it's important because, to be honest, the outcome goals were the only piece of this that came out of the blue sky. We just kind of said, you know what, outcome goal, great, yeah, I want to win this thing. Okay, then we go through the exercise of going through the cycle, and if we don't close that loop to decide whether or not that's something that's actually in line with everything else we've done, then I think we've kind of failed, right? It may be perfectly fine. It may go both ways. We may say, you know what, oh my God, we should be aiming higher. We can do better than that. But I think that review is really important. And then I drew this as a cycle on purpose. You might not be doing this annual planning. You're not going to go through this cycle constantly. You will probably be reviewing the IAPP relatively often, at least your performance plan, whatever form that's going to take, and your gap analysis for sure. Your annual plan probably won't change a whole lot. Dates might change and that kind of thing. You might adjust your goals a little bit, but yeah. Oh, goals. Okay. I think we talked pretty much as I want to about goals, but I thought, I talked a little bit about there being models out there. So there's a few things I want to highlight about goals that hopefully a review. First of all, what I've shown you, hopefully all the goals are now linked to something. They come from something. They're not coming out of the sky, except that initial shot at your outcome goal. Okay. Goals, like I just mentioned about the other documents, are useless if they're sitting somewhere in a drawer or something, right? They need to be tracked regularly. Being objective and measurable, really, really important. Being happy is a great goal, but it's kind of, unless you can measure that somehow or even rate yourself somehow on that, it's hard to know whether or not that's something you've achieved, right? Goals should have some kind of timeline with them. Now, that's one of the reasons we want to put all this stuff into an annual plan, because it puts a timeline on it. And of course, we want it to be relevant. It's just another aspect of goals. Okay. That's the bare bones of a lot of the models for good goals. I just wanted to review that real quick in case nobody had seen one of those models before. The next and maybe last thing, it shouldn't be an afterthought, but it often is a plan for the coach. So one of the things we need to do for ourselves is evaluate whether we have the tools to guide our teams appropriately. But do we know what we know? Do we know what we need to know in order to guide them at the level that they're at? A personal gap analysis by you for you would be helpful here. I have no template for that because, again, we don't take care of ourselves as well as we should. That's another topic for later, but we just don't. What areas do you need more knowledge or experience in? How can you get that knowledge and experience? And if you think about, oh, gee, how am I going to figure this all out? It's exactly the same cycle. What do I want to be? What do I want to do? Well, I don't know. Where do I lack or where am I strong? All here and there. And then what am I going to do about it? Well, I got a plan. Well, that's my APP. And then I put it into a schedule, and it's the same cycle. So it's, for us, we have our own development cycle. It looks like the same thing. Not suggesting you need to document it to the level that we just did for our athletes, but at the same time, you want to put that into your toolbox and consider whether or not you need development as well. Yeah, it's something you can do in your spare time whenever that is. One area for you to look for information on this is actually athlete feedback. Athletes can tell you what you're doing well, what you're doing not so well. It's often the case, and we see this time and time again, that teams outgrow their coaches, and sometimes that's, that can always be okay if a coach is at a level where they're comfortable coaching. I knew a coach, this is quite a few years ago, who was very, very comfortable coaching at the time bantam players and would not entertain coaching even junior players, U20 players. She was a great coach, and she just was not, that was not where she needed to be. Now, it wasn't to say she wasn't keeping up, and it wasn't to say she wasn't on top of things, but but she decided that, you know what, players outgrow me too quickly, and I'm not interested in that. So it's something you've got to dig deep for yourself and evaluate whether you need that and what you need. So definitely your athletes can help you with that, but mentor coach can help you with that too. Mentors are pretty good at seeing things that we ourselves maybe are ignoring or don't see. Just about done. The final result. Okay, their final result. I'm just going to review it really quickly. Just one quick swipe at it. So a planning portfolio looks like really contains 4 different things. It's goals, gap analysis, performance plan, and annual plan. It's really important not to view these as isolated exercises. Not to harp on it, but again, with our next gen applications, often I see 4 separate things coming at me. So I'll see a set of goals, and then I'll see a gap analysis, and then I'll see a performance plan, which has nothing to do with the gap analysis. So I don't know what's going on there. And then I'll see an annual plan that doesn't align with the goals or the gap analysis. So that when I get those submissions, I feel that the person submitting that hasn't understood the whole process. And that's really why I wanted to do this, to make everybody see that there is a process that informs itself as it goes along. These things, the IAPP is relatively easy if you did your gap analysis, because really it's just an action plan. And the annual plan is relatively easy if you've done the other things, because you've got something to inform it. Okay. So it's really important to recognize those are not isolated exercises. One tool feeds another and into the plan, the whole in its own way. The portfolio works as a system, and it's meant to make your job easier. It's a lot of detail, but I think as coaches, we know there's a lot of detail. And I think what the point of doing this on that level of detail is it helps you organize, and it helps you document what you're trying to accomplish. The IAPP piece is being introduced in the curling world now at our national level to bridge some of that planning. And the feedback I've heard is that a lot of the top teams just don't see a use for it. They like the gap analysis and they like having an annual plan, but they don't really see why they need a performance plan. And now that I understand it, I don't understand how you get from the gap to the annual plan without a performance plan in the middle. Because how do you actually address the gap? And a lot of teams, the question's been posed to these teams, and they say, well, we just know what to work on because we know what our gaps are. There's the rub, because the IAPP details it out, and the IAPP documents it and gives you direction. So you don't have to kind of figure it out on the fly. It's a little bit more rigorous, and a little more rigor might be what we need. One last real quick comment. I know we're a little bit later than I meant to be. So I mentioned, like I said, a number of times, our next gen scoring, and our current next gen scoring, the way it works is it's 75% of it is past performance. So how much have you won? And the 25% of it is this planning portfolio. So it's a lot of work for 25%. But part of the issue is the program is funded in such a way that the funding people want to make sure that we're funding people who are performing. Okay, so we have to find the people performing first. So the scoring element really tells us which teams who are performing that have probably a better chance at accomplishing what they're trying to do in the future. So it's a bit of a view into the future. If a team is doing well but not planning very well, how do I know they're going to keep working on the right things? But if a team is doing well and planning well, then I have a lot more confidence that team is going to be somebody that's going to continue going and continue working. And that's why we've structured it that way. Again, I know that doesn't apply to a lot of people on here, but it was, again, the part where I started, why I decided I should do this in the first place. And holy cow, that's the last slide. So I know I talked fairly quickly and I talked a lot, but I would be happy to answer any questions or address any comments that folks might have. And don't feel obligated.
Sean, Peter here, not a question, but just more of a comment on the last part about coach development. One thing that I found, or the plan for the coach, one thing that I found that helped me a lot was I attended a couple of times I've attended the coach CAO's coaching conference, and the opportunity to interact and dialogue with coaches of other sports. It was eye-opening as to what they were doing and how, the techniques that they used and the tools that they used. And, some of what you've laid out is some of the discussions that I had as to what they were doing. Now, of course, some of them, they were much higher level than the teams I was working with, but it was still really, really good to attend.
Completely agree. I think one thing I've kind of openly lamented in the last little while is the ability to interact with coaches in other sports. I'm lucky from my perspective, like, and not at the OCC, but with my work at Humber College, because the coaches there are a relatively tight-knit group, and I don't have the first foggiest clue as to how you coach a cross-country athlete. But I could pick up the phone in 2 minutes and talk to a relatively high-level cross-country coach. And why would I want to know that? Well, it's not even about that. I've gone to my coaching group any number of times to ask questions and about how they handle this kind of thing and how they handle that kind of thing. And I really think anytime you get a chance to talk to coaches in other sports, it's great. And again, I'm lucky, actually also lucky in the OCC side of it because of my involvement with stuff at the CSIO. Because when I go to one of these things, I'm usually the only curling person in there. And if I'm not, it's probably Jen Ferris is sitting beside me. So, lots of cross-pollination going on.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I just had a question on in the chat. And are we able to send out the analysis tools and the Excel spreadsheets? And I'm responding that we will be able to once we have permission to. Correct, Sean?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything. Well, I know 100%. There's nothing copyrighted there.
No.
And it's that stuff is. I feel like I sent all this stuff out to the public when we sent the Next Gen program out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I 100%. And if we can't send something in there, then we can send a pretty good version of it. So yeah, I expect it all to be able to go out anytime.
And I have a less colorful and somewhat simpler version that I can send out as well.
Perfect.
Of the annual plan. Yeah, for sure.
Now, Sean, you had made comment about testing, and that Curling Canada had, I guess, various testing scenarios. Could you provide the link for that?
So, yes, no. I'm happy to share it, but it's actually like it's going to be on your phone, and so if you've got an iPhone, it'll be in the Apple Store, and if you've got an Android, it'll be in the Google Play Store.
So Singles, is that the
Singles app? Yeah.
Yeah. So just search Singles in the App Store.
Singles in the App Store.
Singles curling. Singles curling.
Well, you're the Android, aren't you? Or sorry, you're the Apple people.
I'm the Apple person. Sorry. Oh, no, it's sorry.
No,
that's not my pay grade, Andrea.
The apps?
Yeah.
Well, it's not necessary, Bertha. Everybody has their own systems, and this is a brand new thing that Curling Canada came up with. So
yeah, it's really, really new. In the App Store on Apple, it's called Singles Curling.
Yeah.
And I think it's called the same thing on Android. I've got both. I've got an iPad and an Android phone, and I've only got it on my phone because it's a little handier. But it's pretty extensive, and there is if you really, really, really hate it, there's a paper version, but it's a book. Just because like every shot is on its own page, and this has got U18, U15, U20, U25, and it's got a number of shots for each.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a book. But I mean, and the idea being, the other thing about the Singles app is the idea being that you would take a team out and you would have them perform their shots, and then you can upload the scores to a national database. And so there's some talk about I think whether it's going to pop or be a requirement for the U15 something maybe. But anyway, it's being thrown around out there. So
Okay.
I do have access to the paper version if you wanted the paper version. But the only caveat there is if anything changes, the paper version's out of date. So
Yeah.
that's all I can do.
The singles curling is updated regularly. So
yeah.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Gone. All right, Sean, thank you so much for sharing your extensive experience and expertise. I know you've worked really hard on not just the next gen stuff, but Sean also organizes the Trillium Camp, and it has played a large role in the Amethyst Camp as well. It's a thorough description of the process. I think people will find it very helpful, especially once they get the documents. The tools were great. And I think this is just awesome. So I will send out the recording as soon as I get it loaded onto YouTube. I'll also send the link to the next 2 sessions, which one is November 28th, and it's a delivery update, also at 7 p.m. Eastern. December 13th is brushing. Sean, keep an eye on the chat box there. December 13th is brushing, and that will feature Glen Polly. So I'll send a link to the registration for that. Other than that, thank you again, Sean. This has been very helpful. So stay tuned, folks. And I think many of you have already registered for the upcoming webinars. But anyway.
What was the first date, Andrea? What was the next date?
Tuesday, November the 28th.
Oh, good. Thank you.
But Bertha,
And December the 13th.
Yeah, and keep an eye on those of you from out of Ontario, keep an eye on your provincial association, because these same webinars will be delivered through the provincial association, and they may be free through your provincial association. If you sign up for the Ontario ones, there is a charge. So just keep an eye as well. If it doesn't come up and you want to come in on ours, that's great.
Andrew, I'm going to be out of the country on the 28th. Can I still get access to the video to watch it?
Yeah, we'll record everything, or make sure that it's recorded and share the recording. So go ahead and register, because then for sure you'll get it.
Okay.
I only send it to those who have registered.
Got it.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening in. And Sean, I think it's a record. We only lost one person. So it was riveting.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Take care, guys.